In this episode, we speak with Sven Dharmani, the Global Advanced Manufacturing and Mobility Supply Chain Leader at Ernst Young. An accomplished operations advisor, Sven helps clients adopt leading-edge digital and Industry 4.0 capabilities, resulting in transformation of their business operations. He brings a global perspective from his business experience in North and South America, Europe, Asia, Australia, and Africa. He was named by the Consulting Report an awardee of the Top 25 Automotive Consultants and Leaders of 2024. EY teams in more than 150 countries work across a full spectrum of services in assurance, consulting, tax, strategy, and transactions, strengthened by sector experience and diverse ecosystem partners. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the Executive Chairman of Market Insight Media and Managing Partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Top Consultant, a podcast featuring today's best consultants who advise and provide services to corporations, governments, nonprofits, and other organizations. Executives and key decision makers tune in to Top Consultant to identify the most knowledgeable and experienced consultants for their most important projects.
Sven, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Yeah, pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So where I'd like to kick off is your area of expertise, which is in the automotive sector and general supply chain. One of the things we always like to highlight is for most of the people in the industry, say in the automotive industry, what is the thing that people are not paying attention to that they should be paying attention to, and where maybe your expertise comes into play?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everybody is paying attention to the case to connected, autonomous, shared, and electrified vehicles. Everybody's paying attention to that. Everybody's paying attention to the change in adoption or the growth rate of electrified vehicles. What people aren't maybe recognizing as much is everything that's going to go behind it to support this transition. So, there is certainly some emphasis on infrastructure, but really, in order to generate and charge vehicles, whenever we get to electrified vehicles, you need power. You need pure electricity generation to have another couple of gigawatts to charge the cars across the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, where is that power coming from? And how is it going to get to the charging stations, right? Where people actually charge the cars? Because the current infrastructure certainly isn't going to suffice, right? And assuming we produce let's say 10 gigawatts additional power every day, what is the source of that, right? So what is a clean energy source? Otherwise, you're just shifting the emissions from the tailpipe to the power plant, because OEMs are focused on primarily the vehicles, right? And to create the energy and to get the energy to the end use point, it's going to take public, private, and government infrastructure, all of the parties playing together. And, we just don't see sufficient teaming there to make that happen. Not to mention that US is a huge country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Europe is different where it's much more concentrated, but Europe has a different problem where to dig and lay down new cables, it's really hard because it's so dense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are two different types of problems. One is the scale versus complexity, but that's the fundamental thing that's probably less addressed yet. The second side of the business in automotive specifically is, I'll call it service parts and accessories. For all the OEMs, service parts and accessories are a huge profit driver. They make small amount of money on vehicle. It's going to be about $3,000 to $5,000 less per vehicle on electrified vehicle. So the margin's going down on the EV side until we can get to scale, let's say 10, 15 years from now. And then number of parts you're going to sell is going to be like 30% less because you're not using internal combustion parts, right? So spark plugs, belts, oil, filters, things like that, you're not using that anymore. Dealers are also going to lose service, right? So let's just put dealers aside for a second, but the OEMs are going to lose 30% of revenue. So how do you create this value chain that can still fund the rest of the company? because service parts typically are responsible for 60 to 70% of the profit, the bottom line of the OEMs. So you're losing margin on the new vehicle side and you're losing revenue on the spare part side.
Mm-hmm.
How is this all going to really work in the future state? I think a lot of OEMs are not paying sufficient attention. And then, by the way, for the next 15 years, your complexity of the business is going to grow exponentially because you have to support the internal combustion vehicles, you have to support hybrid vehicles, which are more complex, plug-in hybrids, and EVs.
Mm-hmm.
You have four types of vehicles that you're going to support for that transition period, and your product complexity has just gone up a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very challenging environment. And I think maybe a handful of OEMs really recognize truly the magnitude of the hill they have to climb. So I think that's something probably that deserves a lot more focus because if you can't be efficient on the parts and accessories, which creates most of your margin, you're going to lose the revenue, you're going to lose the margin on the OE side, and it's going to be a financial challenge, specifically as you have to pour so much more investment into new product development.
It's been fascinating to watch. I think everyone has seen this gradual shift to
Yeah,
EVs, particularly when Tesla first started coming out with their sleek new models.
right.
But yet today, and we're several years, if not, over a decade in to this transition. But what's interesting is I think when we see the numbers, the demand is not as high for EVs. And in fact, the pricing still has to be so low to attract the consumer.
Yeah.
So, what is it about maybe consumer perception that, maybe is not matching up with where kind of the big corporate decision makers are foreseeing the industry evolving to? If you take a poll of maybe people there's still like maybe a small segment that are really fanatics for EVs. But
Right.
by and large, people are still buying traditional
I
engines.
Yeah, and I think hybrids are a good transition path. To me, from my vantage point and the research we do, I think there are kind of a few primary factors. And I'll start with North America first. I'll say like range anxiety is probably one of the biggest thing people have to overcome
Hmm.
because 80% of the time we drive the car in our neighborhood, taking kids to school, going shopping, going to office. So 80% of the time we are local, suburban, whatever you want to call it, we can charge at home. But 20% of the time we use the vehicle to go from one city to another to visit family, Thanksgiving, whatever the case may be, Easter. And unless you've got a fleet of cars, like that EV can't suffice for 100% of my use, right?
Hmm.
So now I got to have at least 2 to 3 cars in my arsenal if I don't have the range and infrastructure just isn't there yet, right?
Hmm.
I can go from DC to Boston by just stopping twice for gas. 2 stops, fill up gas, good to go, right? Most cars, non-EVs have range of 500 miles, right? So, I mean, hypothetically, I could just even go with one stop and it's only 5 minutes to refuel. But
Hmm.
if I take an EV, first, like I have to find charging stations. A lot of percentage of charging stations aren't running at capacity. So they say 70 kilowatts, they're only charging at 25 kilowatts. So now it takes me 4x longer to charge. And my 20-minute stop becomes like an hour long stop.
Hmm.
And also because they are not working properly, they're getting backed up. So I think one issue is the range itself, which is only like in a small percentage of cases do you truly need it,
Hmm.
right? But when you need it, it's a challenge. Second part to that is I can't rely on the infrastructure as much yet because we don't have that yet. We have it in urban areas, like we have it in my office parking, right? There's charging stations, we have it at the mall. But
Hmm.
when I go from Cleveland to Chicago, right? Or I'm going from LA to Vegas, like how many charging stations are there in between? That's the biggest issue. The third issue is certainly the price point. If I were to look at comparable vehicles, there is still a substantial price differential between 10 to 20,000 premium for EV for the same class of vehicles. So I think certainly, incentives and rebates and all those things, subsidies help. But until we have the volume, we're not going to bring the price down. So it's a little bit of a catch 22. I'm sure you recall the days of Garmin GPS when they were like $600-700,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the navigation system in the car would cost you like $2,000 to add that nav. And it was a whatever memory stick or SD card or a CD based, DVD based navigation system. But as the scale went on, as the adoption increased, like the cost came down. And at the end, you could buy any GPS you wanted for $100. And now everybody has a phone, so it's free. Google
Mm-hmm.
Maps is free, or Waze is free. Apple Maps is free. So I think there is the curve of the volume and per unit cost. So I think that's the issue, is because we don't have enough volume yet. We don't have the economies of scale. But the other thing from a North America perspective is all the critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, they come from overseas.
Mm-hmm.
China is responsible for almost 80% of our lithium production, refining that comes into our batteries. So I think there is a reliance on foreign sources yet still. And unless we can bring the price point down and the volume up, that balance, we won't get to a different point on the inflection curve.
I like to talk about product quality and the consumer experience. And this is just anecdotal, but if I talk to someone who has, say, driven more of a native EV, the brand was set up to do only EV, their
Yep.
experience is very different than, say, a traditional European car company that's now trying to start lines, EV, consumer lines.
Right.
I would say some of these European traditional automakers are struggling. The consumer experience is negative within the first several months. I got to get rid of this car. I hate it. Like I have to go in every month
Yep.
versus one of the newer EV companies saying, this is incredible. I can't believe how fast this is.
Yep.
It's easy to use. I love it. So,
Yep.
can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the challenge of a new startup versus like a traditional OEM. And the problem is the traditional OEMs have become fairly large and complex. So they have a very structured vehicle development process, right? And they're still looking at a vehicle as a vehicle versus the startups like had a clean slate. They didn't have any legacy processes, so they started ground up, and it's much more of a software defined vehicle versus a vehicle which has gotten electrified. So it's
Hmm.
a fundamentally different thing, right? I mean, I was in Shanghai for meetings, and 80% of the cars in Shanghai you would see on the street have green license plates, and they are EVs, right? And the non EVs are blue license plates. So they're primarily luxury cars, right? So
Hmm.
Porsche, Audi, BMW, Mercedes, Jaguar Land Rover. But you get into a taxi or equivalent of an Uber, Didi, and I got into a BYD and I was blown away, right? The finish, the quality. And so Tesla, BYD, all of these upstarts, Lucid, they have been able to create their product platform ground up. It's like, you build a brand new 10,000 square foot house versus you take an old mansion and you're trying to retrofit the modern feel into an existing structure where you can't alter the foundation and you can't move load bearing walls. Really hard to do, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's the challenge the traditional OEMs have is they are kind of like stuck within the paradigm and the existing processes versus just having full freedom and say, I'm going to go with a software defined vehicle and then have that dictate what the vehicle, how it performs, how it works. Think of modular construction, modular architecture, sort of a central nervous system that runs everything versus everything having its own module and integrating. That's where the traditional OEMs are really struggling is
Hmm.
the integration of different modules
Hmm.
versus a central design infrastructure which
Hmm.
runs all the modules. So I think it's a fundamental difference. And I mean, just the ability to not have to deal with legacy development process is what has allowed Tesla, BYD, and the likes to just completely redefined the consumer experience.
Mhm. Sven, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about your background. You've got a very accomplished background in the consulting industry. Maybe you could take us through, start maybe in the beginning, how you got your start and all the way to present day.
Yeah, so I actually started my career in the automotive industry. I started Honda's car operations in India back in the 90s, and we launched the very first car. So it was really exciting. I had previously, interned with Mercedes and VW during my engineering. So I was an engineer to begin with. So I just like fell in love with the industry right at the start of my career. After my master's, I got into consulting, and pretty much over the last 25 years, 18 of the 25 years have been in automotive and around it. So I worked with GM, I worked with Ford, BMW, Lamborghini, which was really cool, by the way, Toyota, Honda, and others, right? So, I started out as an engineer and broadened out and, had different roles within EY. I've been with EY almost 15 years. So I've led our automotive and transportation supply chain globally. And then we expanded that to what we call advanced manufacturing and mobility as it evolved. And now I lead our two verticals for supply chain, which is industrial products as well as aerospace, defense, and mobility. So that's been sort of my journey and been a lot around helping OEMs transform their business or overcome really complex challenges that they have a hard time overcoming themselves because
Mhm.
corporations are really good at running efficiently in a steady state with incremental changes, continuous improvement included. But when you have to go and do a major transformation and go from A to B, it's hard for them to transform because they just don't have the skill set. That's not what they do for a living. And that's what we do every single day is we help companies transform so we can help them get from A to B very efficiently and then they can operate efficiently at either at A or B, but they just can't move from A to B quickly enough and go from ideas to implementation and realization of value. So that's been the most fun part of my career is helping companies transform, realize value, realize goals that they had set out to begin with and get there efficiently and sustainable improvements.
We're entering into the tail end of the conversation, but before I ask my last two questions, could you tell us maybe an example of when you worked with a client? You don't have to get into specifics if you'd prefer not to, but where E&Y really showed up and had a really great outcome for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll talk about two examples which really stand out in my career. One case, we were helping an OEM transform how they thought about working with the retailers, the dealers. And we worked on taking out almost $1 billion in non-value added activities around the world. So that was an amazing experience, but also huge value to the client. And the thing is, there are so many systems that OEMs have, and there's so many different systems that dealers have to interface with. Think about sales process, think about warranty, think about service parts. I mean, they just literally have stickies around the desk, with their logins and IDs because they have to go into 20 different systems, right? So, just transforming that and making that seamless so they can focus on the customer versus copying and pasting a login and copying and pasting a part number or searching for a win and things of that sort. That was an amazing experience. The other one that really stands out is transforming one of the company's logistics operations and creating 250 million plus in value
Mm.
over a period of 2 years. And that's huge when you think about the impact of the business. We took a lot of sequential processes and put them in parallel. We completely redesigned how the work gets done, how you use third parties, right? Because if a company is producing products, their core competency isn't like freight or logistics, right? Or ocean, or they don't have freight forwarders who are experts in the company, right? So there's so many companies, that's all they do. So how do you think about focusing your people's efforts on your core competency and let others, manage what their core competencies are and creating efficiency through that, plus making the whole value chain much more agile and responsive for the customer. So those were like a couple of examples that really stand out for me because they were the most transformative, not just from a impact, but also like value and fundamentally rewiring the way the work was done and how they operated.
Excellent. Okay, last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
There's certainly one person, a partner, who took me under his wing early on in my career, gave me a lot of opportunities. I remember being a young manager and was totally unfamiliar with automotive retail side of the business. And he told me, "We're going to help you. We'll make sure you don't fail because we'll fail. But I have full confidence in you that you can learn and grow." And gave me a ton of opportunities. And as I grew in my career, made sure I had the right opportunities to expand and spread my wings, and supported me through my career journey. And, I try to do the same for people like coach and mentor, is make sure they get the right opportunities, because either you can push them and put them in a role, and then you have to put scaffolding around them to make sure they don't fail, or you can give them opportunities and help them grow step by step. And then as they progress in their career, they are very successful. So certainly one of the partners at EY was very instrumental, even pre-EY, in my career growth, and worked with that partner for almost 20 years out of my 25 years. So it certainly has had massive impact on my career.
Excellent. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
How much time do we have? Maybe I'll boil it down into three things. One of them I just hit upon is helping coach and develop and mentor people, because we can give people opportunities and create the right experiences and bring them and connect them to those so that they can grow, right? So that is a really important part. And that's sort of my pay it forward on a professional side. So I'm very passionate about that. We typically will mentor and coach 10 to 20 people, including minorities, including females, a lot of them females, especially as they're trying to navigate having a family and how to get back and so on and so forth. So that's on the professional side. On the personal front, there are probably two things I'm most passionate about. One is education for children, because that is such a big foundation. It either creates growth and opportunities and really lifts the entire society, or just does not allow people who are stuck to get unstuck. And the second thing on the personal front I'm most passionate about is probably cancer. Several people in my family, immediate family, have been affected by that. A very close friend, several friends actually have been affected by that. So those are the two things I probably care about the most in terms of cause, and how do we help the society work better overall.
Excellent. Sven, want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that too. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited about the future, right? Where our industry is at a major transition point, and we have fun and exciting times ahead of us. So, last 25 years have been phenomenal, and the next 25 years are going to be even more exciting. So can't wait to get into the new state of the industry.
Excellent.